2 injured Marines, a sacred tribute, and a gang with no respect for the uniform. What could possibly go wrong when 2 worlds built on violence finally collide? You won't believe who shows up and what they bring with them. Let us know in the comments section below where you're watching from and why you stand with our veterans. It always started the same way. Kyle Booker tightened his bootlaces with a quiet kind of reverence, not because they needed adjusting, but because muscle memory was something that never faded. His fingers moved with the same crisp precision they had when he was back in the desert heat of Iraq, gearing up with his twin brother Nate under the sharp bark of their squad leader's orders. Except now, there was no squad. No bark, no Nate. Kyle stared into the mirror, his reflection still proudly wrapped in dress blues, one pant leg neatly folded and pinned over a high-tech carbon fiber prosthetic. He didn't need the mirror to know how he looked. He needed it to remind himself he was still standing. On one leg, maybe, but standing nonetheless. He touched the ribbons on his chest, eyes stopping at the Purple Heart. In the Silver Star? Then the photo beside them. Nate, frozen forever at 29, grin wide, flak jacket dusty, with one hand raised in a sarcastic thumbs up and the other gripping a rifle tighter than most people ever gripped life. Kyle pressed his forehead against the frame, just for a moment, just long enough to remember the smell of sand and cordite, the burn of adrenaline, the last scream. "Get down, Kyle, now!" And the silence that followed, the one he still heard in his dreams. It was Memorial Day. Rolling thunder had arrived in San Cielo, and Kyle was going to stand at salute for 3 hours like he had every year since that day. Not for the crowd, not for the photo ops, for Nate, for every name on the wall and every brother or sister who never got to come home. Out front his small lawn had been trimmed to military precision, a single flag planted beside a polished bronze plaque that bore both their names, Sergeant Kyle Booker and Lance Corporal Nathaniel Booker. One survived, one saved the other. He stepped outside and winced at the sunlight before slipping on his cover. He moved slowly, methodically, gripping the cane more from habit than need, as he made his way to the roadside, where a white folding chair sat empty. He would never use it, but it was always there, just in case. By the time Kyle reached the sidewalk, the rumble had already begun. Motorcycles, trucks, jeeps, even bicycles with flags zip-tied to the frames, all pouring down the long avenue in a tide of leather, chrome, and red, white, and blue. San Cielo wasn't a big town, but on Memorial Day it felt like the heart of the nation. He raised his arm in salute, and he held it. Minutes passed, then an hour, then 2. The crowd shifted, shaded under umbrellas, sipping bottled water and passing around sandwiches. But no one touched Kyle. No one interrupted him. They just watched. Respectful, reverent. Until they arrived. No one heard them at first. But Kyle did. Something about the syncopated rhythm of the engines. It wasn't the usual rolling thunder cadence. Too smooth, too quiet, like predators slinking in behind the roar. Then came the pause. A long row of matte black motorcycles cut through the procession like a blade through silk. No flags, no patches anyone recognized, just a silver wolf emblem on the back of their jackets and faces hidden behind dark shades and mirrored visors. They didn't wave, didn't nod. They pulled up near Kyle's post and dismounted as if they owned the street. The crowd shifted again, this time with unease. Kyle kept his arm up, eyes forward, still as a statue. He'd seen men like this before, not on American soil, but in the valleys of Helmand province and the shadows of cartel routes near the border, men who didn't respect uniforms unless they came with bribes or fear. One of them, tall and heavily inked, peeled off from the pack and walked toward Kyle. His gait was slow, deliberate, testing. "Kinda hot to be playing soldier, huh?" the man muttered, standing close enough that Kyle could smell the motor oil and faint trace of cigarettes on his vest. Kyle didn't flinch. He didn't blink. The man leaned in closer. "You even still got legs under all that, or are you salutin' out of habit?" The crowd started murmuring. Someone shouted, "Back off!" But the man ignored them, still staring at Kyle's face. Then something strange happened. Another man from the gang stepped forward, older, scar over his brow, eyes sharp. He looked between Kyle and the first biker, then said one word. "Stop." The tall biker turned, confused. "What?" "I said stop," the older man repeated, pulling off his helmet. His voice was gravel, but not unkind. "Look at the uniform. Look at the face. That's a Marine." Kyle's eyes flicked for the first time, locking with the older man's. Just for a moment. Recognition passed between them. Not names, but something older. The man walked over slowly, then, without a word, came to attention, and saluted. The rest of the gang looked around, unsure. The crowd watched in silence as something profound unfolded, not scripted, not expected. One by one, the bikers removed their helmets. Then they joined the salute. 3 minutes passed. Then 5. Then 10. Someone brought Kyle a bottle of water, which he didn't take. But they placed it at his feet. Another draped a flag-themed cloth between him and the sun. Kyle never moved, never dropped his arm. When the 3 hours passed and the bugle call played from the nearby speaker, Kyle finally lowered his hand and exhaled. Just once. The bikers were still there. The tall one looked changed, less arrogant, more confused, and the older biker stepped forward again, hand extended. Kyle took it. Not a word passed between them, but the weight of everything that did not need to be said was felt by everyone on that street. And somewhere down the avenue, a little girl asked her mother a question. "Are those the bad guys?" And her mother, eyes wet, shook her head slowly. "Not today. Not here. Not while Kyle Booker stood. 2 hours after the salute, Kyle Booker stood in the shadow of a rusted old vending machine behind a gas station off County Line Road, still dressed in his uniform, still refusing to sit in the plastic chair offered to him by a teenager who looked like he'd never seen a war, let alone served in one. The sun had finally begun to dip behind the hills, painting the sky a burnt orange that reminded Kyle of flares and desert fires. He'd managed to slip away from the crowd after shaking a few hands and nodding through a dozen thank yous. The spotlight made him uncomfortable. He didn't do any of it for attention. But something about those bikers didn't sit right. He'd been through enough operations to recognize a staged maneuver. The way they entered, the timing, the formation. It had precision behind it, coordination that most outlaw gangs didn't bother with. And then the man with the scar. That wasn't some small-time thug. That man had military bearing. Kyle took a long sip of lukewarm water and scanned the parking lot. Empty now. Just him, his prosthetic leg, and the faded memory of a salute that felt like it carried more weight than usual. Behind him, the bell above the gas station door jingled. You ever notice how sometimes people salute with their hands but not their hearts? Kyle didn't turn around. He didn't have to. Jake Blasterholtz had a voice like a chainsaw that ran on bourbon and bad decisions. Kyle let out a quiet chuckle. "You still can't sneak up on me even with that limp." Jake stepped beside him, one eye half closed from a shrapnel injury and the other squinting in the dying sun. His leather vest creaked as he shifted, and the heavy combat boots he wore looked out of place on the cracked asphalt. "I wasn't sneaking," Jake said, fishing a toothpick from his pocket. "Just observing, like the old days." Kyle nodded. "Thought you were up north." "I was, but word travels fast, my man. Someone told me you were out here holding down a salute like your arm was made of steel." Jake studied him. "I also heard a crew rolled up looking like they rode straight out of a narco soap opera." Kyle's jaw flexed. "Yeah, you saw them?" "I saw them leave," Jake replied. "I was about 20 bikes back, stuck in the traffic they caused. They didn't salute anybody else, just you." Silence stretched between them, the kind of silence that only combat vets shared. Heavy, honest, full of words that didn't need to be said out loud. "You're not rolling thunder," Kyle finally said. Jake leaned on the vending machine. "Hell no, they're not. You saw the patch?" Kyle nodded once. Silver Wolf. No chapter name, no motto. Just the emblem. Jake spat into the dirt, which means either a new gang is trying real hard to keep low profile, or an old one's resurfacing with a new face. You think it's Cartel? Jake didn't answer immediately. He reached into his vest and pulled out a crumpled photo. It was old, stained, and slightly torn on the edges. He handed it to Kyle without saying a word. Kyle stared at it. 3 men, all in tactical gear. One was clearly Jake, another had been blacked out with marker, and the third... Kyle froze. It was the biker with the scar. "You know him?" Kyle asked, eyes locked on the face in the picture. Jake's voice was low. "Name used to be Ramirez. U.S. Army Ranger. Went south about 6 years ago. Started showing up in places he shouldn't have been. Private security gigs with zero oversight. Last I heard, he disappeared down in Sonora. Rumors say he's been working for Los Sangrientos ever since." Kyle handed the photo back. Cartel muscle on American soil? "More than muscle," Jake said. "He's got strategy, discipline. You felt it too, right?" "Yeah," Kyle said softly. "It wasn't a salute, it was a signal." Jake nodded, exactly. They stood in silence again, both men watching the shadows crawl across the gas station. "I think we're gonna have company again," Kyle muttered. Jake cracked his neck. "Then we better figure out what kind of party we're throwing." A black Dodge Charger pulled into the parking lot. Kyle instinctively straightened, eyes narrowing. The windows were tinted, and the license plate was covered with a piece of cloth. It idled for a few seconds, then shut off. The driver door opened, and out stepped Maria Delgado. Kyle blinked in surprise. Maria? She looked different out of her nurse scrubs. Jeans, tactical boots, and a military mal blouse, with her hair pulled tight in a ponytail. But her eyes were the same. Intense, tired, ready. "I figured I'd find you here," she said. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Friend of yours?" "She runs the VA outreach center in town," Kyle said. "She's the one who makes sure guys like me don't fall through the cracks. And girls like me too," Maria added, walking up. "You think I don't keep tabs on this stuff? That salute you gave today was all over social media. But it wasn't your picture I was watching, it was theirs." She handed them her phone. It showed a grainy video, probably taken by someone across the street. It zoomed in on the bikers, the emblem, and their strange, synchronized behavior. Then it paused. "There," Maria said, pointing. In the frame, just barely visible, was a hand signal. The scarred biker raised 2 fingers and dropped them. It wasn't random. "I ran it through an interpreter who used to work intel in Juarez," she continued. "That's a sign for initiation, not tribute." Kyle exhaled slowly. They were marking territory. Jake looked over at Kyle. "Why you?" Kyle shook his head. "Maybe because they knew I wouldn't flinch. Maybe because they knew Nate's story. Or maybe they're just sending a message." Maria's expression darkened. "Then maybe it's time we send one back." Jake grinned. "Now, that's the Maria I like." Kyle looked at both of them, then back at the horizon, where the sky was now purple and deepening into night. "We don't hit first," he said quietly. "But we sure as hell don't stand down either." A pause. Jake adjusted his vest. Maria checked the clip in her sidearm. And Kyle, still in full uniform, still standing on one good leg, felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Readiness. Brotherhood. Put whatever was coming, he wouldn't be facing it alone. Not this time. Not ever again. The sound came first, low, throaty engines purring in the distance like predators circling prey. Kyle Booker heard them before anyone else. His hearing wasn't what it used to be, but there were certain sounds he'd never stopped noticing. The crunch of boots in sand, the snap of a bolt being locked into place, the deep, synchronized growl of tuned motorcycle engines moving in formation. That kind of sound didn't belong to weekend riders or freedom-loving patriots. It belonged to something else. Something organized. They came just after dark, rolling into the far end of San Cielo like they'd rehearsed it. 6 bikes at first, then 4 more. No headlights, no music, just silence and chrome and purpose. At the center of the formation was Ramirez. At least, that's what Kyle and Jake were calling him for now. His real name didn't matter. What mattered was what he brought with him. Jake stood just inside the garage of Kyle's small home, arms crossed, eyes squinting through the dusty window blinds. He was chewing on a toothpick, his jaw tight. Kyle sat on the edge of the old ammo crate that doubled as a workbench, adjusting the laces on his running shoe and watching the formation on a grainy security monitor. "Them?" Jake asked. Kyle didn't answer right away. He zoomed in on one of the bikes. Same silver wolf emblem on the leather cut, same low posture, same arrogant formation. "Yeah," Kyle finally said. "That's them." Jake spit the toothpick out into a rusted coffee can. "They ain't here for the parade." "No," Kyle said. "They're here to test the line." Down the block, porch lights flicked on as residents peeked through curtains, their instincts prickling. San Cielo wasn't used to this kind of presence, the kind that didn't belong to lawmen or locals, the kind that didn't wave or nod, the kind that claimed space without asking permission. Maria Delgado pulled into the driveway in her dusty Ford Explorer. She exited the vehicle with a tactical backpack slung over one shoulder and a pistol holstered under her jacket. Her jaw was tight. She didn't ask if anything had changed. She could see it in their faces. "Same crew?" she asked, dropping the bag near the workbench. "Plus more," Kyle replied. "They doubled their numbers." "They'll move on the VFW next," Jake said. "Claiming symbols. That's what these bastards do. You occupy a space, you claim it, you control it." "Not while I'm breathing," Kyle muttered. Maria unzipped the backpack and began pulling out equipment. Walkie-talkies, burner phones, a printed map of San Cielo, a set of laminated photos marked with red X's and circles. "I spoke to my contact at Border Intel," she said, sliding the map onto the table. "These guys aren't new. They're an offshoot, Cartel looped but separate, ex-military, ex-private contractors, kicked out of everything official. They call themselves Lobos Fantasmas." "Ghost wolves," Jake said, smirking without humor. "That explains the silent treatment." "They've been testing small towns," Maria continued, "places near bases, veteran communities. They build street rep by starting trouble, then back it up with precision strikes. Make people afraid to stand up." Kyle pointed to a red circle on the map. "Then they picked the wrong town." "They always think we're weak," Jake said, "because we're quiet, because we don't walk around bragging about our ribbons, but quiet doesn't mean soft." Kyle looked at the monitor again. The ghost wolves were idling in front of the local bar. They hadn't gone inside yet, just parked, just watching. "We need to get ahead of this," Kyle said. "Can't let them set the tone." Maria hesitated. "You sure you're ready for this? You've been through hell, Kyle. This is something else." Kyle looked her dead in the eyes. "I didn't lose a leg and a brother to sit on my hands while thugs try to rewrite what honor looks like." Maria nodded. Jake slapped a fresh magazine into his Glock. "Then let's write them a reminder." They didn't approach directly. Kyle knew better than that. You don't confront wolves in their den. You control the perimeter, choke their options, and let them know you're watching without ever blinking. It was how Force Recon operated. Insert quietly, observe thoroughly, disrupt surgically. So they split up. Jake headed to the VFW with a few local vets, 2 Army, 1 Navy, 1 former Air Force PJ with a scar across his cheek and the kind of stare that froze most conversations. They weren't armed openly, but they wore patches and gear that told their own story. Real warriors didn't need to posture. Maria took her post at the clinic. She knew most of the ghost wolves' tactics involved fear, targeting women, elders, or local symbols of stability. Her job was to be a visible deterrent, calm, prepared, connected. "And Kyle?" Kyle went to the diner. It was the same place he and Nate used to grab eggs and black coffee before morning runs. It hadn't changed much, still smelled like bacon grease and old linoleum. but now it sat right across from where the ghost wolves had gathered, a perfect view. He walked in with purpose, nodding at the owner, Beth, who gave him a subtle look of concern. "You okay, Kyle?" she asked. "I'm just here for coffee," he replied. She poured without asking more. That's how Beth was. He sat in the booth by the window, no shades, no disguise, and waited. Didn't take long. One of the wolves crossed the street, hands in his pockets, face obscured under a low-brimmed cap. He walked in, sat across from Kyle without invitation, smiled like they were old friends. "Sergeant Booker," he said, "hell of a tribute today, really moving." Kyle didn't return the smile. "Funny, I didn't see you salute." The man's eyes twinkled with amusement. "We show our respect in other ways. Cartel money, threats, fear." Kyle's tone was flat. "No," the man said, voice still smooth. "Control. Order. We're not trying to cause problems. We're offering opportunity." Kyle took a slow sip of coffee. The man leaned forward. "You think this little town can resist forever? You've got honor, I get it. But honor doesn't pay bills. Doesn't protect families. We do." Kyle set the mug down carefully. "You'd want to understand, Marines," he said. "We don't bend. We don't break. And we sure as hell don't sell out our people." The man's smile disappeared. "This isn't a negotiation, Sergeant. It's a warning." Kyle stood up. "Good," he said. "Then let me return the favor." He pulled back his jacket just enough to reveal the patch stitched onto the inside lining. "Force Recon, United States Marines." The man blinked. "You've got no idea what's coming for you," Kyle said quietly. "But you'll remember this day, the day the wolves met someone who didn't run." He walked out of the diner without another word, and behind him, in the shadows of a quiet town that had buried too many flags, the air thickened with the promise of coming fire. Ramirez stood in the middle of an abandoned shipping yard on the south edge of San Cielo, arms folded, watching dust swirl in the moonlight like ghosts of choices he hadn't made. He didn't talk much. Didn't have to. The men around him were loyal, not because he paid them well, but because he was the kind of man who didn't ask for your trust. He demanded it, with every order, every glare, every inch of ground his boots claimed. He had learned a long time ago that fear could be more reliable than money. Fear didn't fluctuate with the market. Still, something about Kyle Booker rattled him. It wasn't the uniform. He'd seen plenty of uniforms, worn one himself once, back when he believed in country and oaths and command structures, before the betrayal, before the op in Nicaragua, where they left him and his team behind like pawns in a game someone else stopped playing. No, it was the eyes. Kyle didn't fear death. Ramirez respected that, feared it too. Behind him, a younger biker named Sal paced, anxious. He was the kind of man who liked to fight first and talk later, which was probably why Ramirez rarely let him speak at all. "You want me to take care of him?" Sal asked, hand resting on the grip of a cheap pistol tucked into the back of his jeans. Ramirez didn't look at him. "No. But no," he repeated, this time slower, sharper. "Booker isn't some civilian who'll tuck tail and run if we throw a few firecrackers. He's trained. He's patient. He's got history." Sal spat into the gravel. "Then what? We let him punk us out in front of the town?" "We let him think he's safe," Ramirez said, finally turning around. "We let him stand tall and proud and comfortable. Then, when his defenses slip, we take what matters to him." Sal frowned. "What's that? His house? His leg?" Ramirez's voice was calm, almost casual. "His people? Across town, in the upstairs room of the old fire station that had become their makeshift command post." Kyle stood in front of a dry erase board, marker in hand, sleeves rolled up, sweat lining the back of his neck. "The ghost wolves aren't here for the money," he said, circling an area near the edge of town. "Not yet. That comes later. First, they destabilize, make the community doubt its safety. Then they offer their version of peace. controlled, dirty, and permanent. Jake leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. You think they'll hit the VFW? No, Kyle said. Too obvious. They'll hit the soft targets first. Maria walked in mid-sentence, a folder under her arm, and her face a little too pale. I just came from the community center, she said. 2 of our homeless vets didn't show up for check-in. One of them left all his stuff behind. ID, dog tags, meds. Jake straightened in his chair. You think they were taken? Kyle nodded. Or coerced. Maria handed him the folder. Inside were photos. The missing vets weren't just anyone. One was Staff Sergeant Wells, a former EOD specialist. The other, Tyrone Ellis, used to run convoy security in Afghanistan. Not the type to wander off without a word. They're building leverage, Kyle muttered. They want us looking over our shoulders. Jake stood. We bring in the sheriff? Full support. No, Kyle said quickly. Not yet. Maria raised a brow. Why the hell not? Because Ramirez isn't afraid of cops. He's dealt with enough to know most departments are spread thin and tied up with paperwork. He wants to provoke a uniform response, to justify retaliation. Jake cursed under his breath. So what's the plan? Wait for him to burn something down? Kyle looked out the cracked window at the streetlights flickering like weak sentinels in the dark. No, we make a stand before that. We draw a line. He picked up a marker and circled the town square. Tomorrow night we set the stage. We hold the square. Veteran presence. Public visibility. Let the town see that we're not afraid. If Ramirez wants to push, he'll have to do it in the open. Jake smirked. You know that's what he wants, right? Kyle nodded. So we give it to him, but on our terms. The next evening, the town square of San Cielo glowed under rows of makeshift lights, strung between flag poles and lamp posts like a 4th of July carnival gone tactical. Veterans from every corner of the county began arriving by dusk, some in old fatigues, others in vests and biker cuts, a few just wearing their hats and the silent weight of everything they'd carried. The stage was small but solid, an American flag flanked by a POWMA banner. Folding chairs filled slowly. Families stood in clusters. Local kids darted between booths, handing out water bottles. But beneath it all was a hum of tension, an unspoken awareness that this wasn't just a gathering. It was a challenge. Jake stood near the center, arms crossed, sunglasses perched atop his head as if daring the night to try anything foolish. Maria moved through the crowd like a general, checking in on volunteers, whispering quiet warnings to the sheriff's deputy posted on the corner. And Kyle, he stood at the microphone, not speaking yet, just present, visible, unbowed. Then the engines came, soft at first, then louder. The wolves. They rolled in just as the flag ceremony began, their bikes forming a half circle on the far edge of the square. Ramirez didn't dismount. He simply sat there, arms on the bars, visor reflecting the floodlights. Kyle stepped forward to the mic. Tonight, he said, voice even, we remember the fallen. We remember the ones who gave everything, but we also honor the ones who came home and still fight for stability, for dignity, for each other. The crowd murmured agreement. And if anyone thinks they can come here and rewrite what that sacrifice means, he continued, eyes locked on the wolves, they're welcome to try. There was no cheer, no applause, just silence. Then Ramirez revved his engine once and rode away. His crew followed. No words, no confrontation, but Kyle knew better. That wasn't surrender. That was calculation. And Ramirez didn't blink because he hadn't played his hand yet. Maria came up beside him. That bought us time, not peace. Jake joined them, scanning the shadows. They'll be back, but next time it won't be about territory. Kyle looked up at the flag. No, he said, it'll be personal. And they all knew what that meant. Ramirez wouldn't strike the stage. He'd strike the heart, where it hurt the most, where Kyle had tried so long to keep buried, where the memory of Nate still lived, fragile and unguarded. They weren't defending a town anymore. They were defending each other, and the wolves were still circling. Ramirez moved like a man who didn't need to run. He operated with patience, walking through shadows as if time itself waited on him. That's how he'd survived this long, by never hurrying, never acting out of emotion. But tonight wasn't about discipline. Tonight was about message, a message he planned to etch into the bones of this quiet little town with silence, precision, and just enough violence to make fear stick in their throats for years to come. He stood at the edge of an overgrown alley behind Sanciello's elementary school, a place he knew would be empty after sundown. He pulled a burner phone from his jacket pocket, dialed, and waited. No ringtone, just a quick connection. "They're in place?" A gruff voice responded, "Ready. All exits covered. Got the girl." Ramirez didn't smile, but there was a slight pause in his breath. "Good. Hold her. Don't hurt her. Yet." He hung up. Nearby, 3 of his crew crouched beside a battered van with its plates removed. Inside, tied at the wrists and gagged, was a young woman with dark curly hair and a bruise forming just beneath her left eye. She kicked once, hard, and the sound thudded against the van wall. Maria Delgado wasn't going quietly. Ramirez admired that. "She's got fight," Sal muttered, arms folded. "She better," Ramirez said. "Otherwise this doesn't mean anything." Sal raised a brow. "So what's the play? We drop her body and scatter?" Ramirez turned slowly, eyes cold. "No. We let Booker find her." He walked forward and opened the van. Maria glared at him, blood on her lip, chest heaving. "You're not gonna win," she hissed through the gag. Ramirez knelt beside her. "I already have," he whispered. "He'll come to you. And when he does, he'll bring everyone else, the whole patriotic circus." He stood up and shut the door. "And that's when we burn it down." 2 blocks away, Kyle Booker's hands clenched the steering wheel of Jake's pickup so tightly his knuckles paled. The message had come through an anonymous number, just a single photo of Maria, blindfolded, with a date and time scrawled in red across the bottom. Midnight, East End, alone. Jake rode shotgun, checking a pistol he'd taken from his glove box. "You're not going alone," he said flatly. Kyle didn't look at him. "You know I have to." Jake shook his head. "No. What you have to do is survive. What we all do. She's one of us." Jake's voice lowered. "Exactly. So we don't leave anyone behind." Kyle pulled onto a dirt access road, tires kicking up gravel like gunfire in the dark. "You think Ramirez is counting on that?" Jake asked. "That we can't resist the rescue op?" Kyle nodded. "That's why we make it look like I walked in alone." "And the rest of us?" "We follow protocol," Kyle said. "Circle behind, watch the flanks, wait for my signal." Jake let out a breath. Always hated being bait. Kyle's eyes didn't leave the road. So did I, until I learned how to bite back. They arrived at the East End industrial lot at 11:43 p.m. It was silent, abandoned decades ago when the rail yard shut down and never looked back. A single security light flickered overhead like a dying star, casting long shadows across a field of shipping containers and rusted-out machinery. Kyle stepped out alone. He was back in uniform, not full dress but utility fatigues, and a patch on his shoulder that bore the weight of every friend he'd buried. His prosthetic clicked softly against the gravel as he walked forward, hands visible, weapon holstered. From behind a stack of crates, Ramirez emerged. No mask, no helmet, just a man stripped down to the truth. "You showed." "I always show," Kyle said. Ramirez tilted his head. "Where's your backup?" Kyle glanced around the empty lot. "I don't need backup to talk." Ramirez chuckled. "Talk? You think that's what this is?" Kyle's jaw tightened. "Where is she?" "Safe," Ramirez said. "For now." "But you already knew this wasn't just about her." Kyle nodded. "It's about control, fear." Ramirez took a slow step forward. "It's about legacy, Sergeant. You had yours. Now I build mine." He gestured, and two bikers dragged Maria from the van, arms bound, blood trickling from a cut above her eyebrow. Kyle didn't move. "Let her go." Ramirez raised a brow. "And if I don't?" Kyle took one step closer. "Then you find out what it really means to wake a Marine who's already buried his brother." That's when it happened. 3 shots echoed from the far edge of the lot. Ramirez's men ducked, confused. Jake's voice rang out over a comm from the perimeter. "Now!" From the shadows, 8 veterans emerged in coordinated silence. Old Marines, Army Rangers, 1 Navy SEAL, and an Air Force sniper perched high above in a water tower. They moved with practiced speed, not wasting a second. 1 disabled vet rolled in on a modified wheelchair with armor plating welded to the sides, laying cover fire from a custom-built AR. Sal reached for his weapon, but Jake tackled him hard, both men slamming into a stack of pallets that exploded in a cloud of dust and wood. Kyle rushed forward as 2 of Ramirez's men tried to pull Maria back. He dropped one with a brutal elbow, the other with a leg sweep that made his prosthetic hum with effort. Then he was at her side, pulling her behind a container. "You good?" he asked. Maria spat out blood. "I will be." "Stay down." Then Kyle turned, and Ramirez was waiting. No weapons, just fists. "You want to end this?" Kyle growled. Ramirez dropped his vest and cracked his knuckles. "Let's see who the real wolf is." They collided like freight trains. Kyle blocked high, ducked low, caught Ramirez in the ribs with a quick hook. Ramirez countered with a brutal knee that sent Kyle staggering. They circled, both breathing heavy, both bleeding from cuts that hadn't been there a minute ago. But Kyle didn't stop, because he'd fought worse. Because he'd been broken and rebuilt. Because Nate wouldn't forgive him if he quit now. Ramirez came in swinging, but Kyle shifted his weight, caught the arm, and drove him into the dirt with a hard slam that rattled the bones of the earth. Ramirez groaned, dazed. Kyle stood over him. "You came to take something," he said, breath heaving. "But this town doesn't belong to fear. It belongs to those who earn it." Ramirez coughed. "Then finish it." Kyle looked toward the vets, now securing the area, binding the last of the wolves. "No," he said, "I don't need to." He turned to Maria and nodded. "It's over." She nodded back, "Not yet," because behind them the town was waking up. Lights in windows, voices raised. People coming out not in fear, but in solidarity. A new sound began to rise. Not sirens, not engines, but something deeper, something stronger. Right. By dawn, the industrial yard was a crime scene wrapped in caution tape and scuffed boot prints. The sun was barely peeking over the edge of San Cielo's hills, casting gold over the broken wreckage of the Wolves' operation. Sheriff's deputies moved in silence, collecting evidence, photographing tire tracks, zip-tying gang members who lay face down in the gravel. The air still carried the smell of gasoline and blood, but also of something else. Relief. Kyle Booker sat on the tailgate of Jake's truck, his shirt torn, his knuckles scraped, and a thin line of dried blood across his brow. He held a bottle of water in one hand, but hadn't drunk from it yet. The sounds around him faded in and out. Maria giving her statement to one of the deputies, Jake cracking jokes with the medic, someone pulling tarp over a pile of confiscated weapons. He wasn't thinking about the fight. He was thinking about Nate. About how, for the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was standing in his brother's shadow, but alongside it. Maria limped over, her wrist wrapped in gauze, an ice pack pressed to her ribs. "You all right?" she asked. Kyle didn't answer right away. He looked at her, then nodded. "You?" "I've been through worse," she said with a soft smile. Kyle gave a faint chuckle. "I believe it." They both fell into a silence that wasn't heavy. It was the kind that came after doing what had to be done and knowing you'd do it again if called. Then Jake walked up, rubbing his hands together, a crooked grin on his face. Well, look at us. Still standing." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Barely." Jake gestured to the chaos. "Whole gangs in custody, Ramirez is in the back of the sheriff's car, chewing on the inside of his cheek like it owes him rent. And the town? Man, they're already calling you two heroes. Kyle frowned. That's not what this was about. I know, Jake said, but maybe it's time they saw it for themselves. By the afternoon, word had spread. It started with whispers at the bakery, then phone calls to neighbors. By evening, half of San Cielo had gathered at the town square, not because anyone planned it, but because something in their bones told them to come. The ones who hadn't heard yet showed up just because they saw the flags flying higher than usual. Veterans came in full gear. Families brought their kids. Shop owners locked their doors early just to be there. Beth from the diner rolled out a table with free coffee and lemonade. The mayor, clearly unprepared but earnest, stood behind the podium and tapped the mic. I don't have a speech, she said, because I didn't know we'd be standing here like this, but maybe that's the point. We weren't supposed to be standing here, not after what they tried, but we are, because some people still believe in this town, still believe in standing for something. She looked at Kyle and Maria. And because of them, there was a hush, then a rising cheer. Nothing theatrical, just real. Kyle shifted awkwardly, trying to move toward the back of the crowd, but people kept stepping in to shake his hand. First a teenager in a school hoodie who looked nervous as he approached. "Sir, my uncle was in the Marines. He always talked about how real ones don't need to brag." He glanced down at Kyle's uniform. "I didn't get it until now." Kyle offered his hand. "What was your uncle's name?" "Derek, Corporal Derek Langston." Kyle nodded. "He served with honor." The boy looked like he might cry. Then came an older woman with tears already in her eyes. Her husband had served in Korea. She said Kyle reminded her of him, not because of how he fought, but how he stood when it mattered. One by one they came, and Kyle realized this wasn't about him anymore. It was about healing, about dignity, reclaim, about people seeing what real strength looked like, not from guns or intimidation, but from integrity. Maria took the mic, her voice still hoarse from the night before. "I grew up in this town," she said. "I watched a lot of good people leave because they thought no one cared anymore. I watched others stay and feel forgotten." She paused. "But last night we proved something." She looked at Kyle. "That we don't run. That when someone tries to intimidate us, we don't hide. We stand together. And when they come after one of us, they face all of us." A cheer rose again, louder this time, thicker with emotion. Maria stepped back. Jake leaned in and whispered, "Your turn." Kyle shook his head. "I've said enough." Jake clapped a hand on his shoulder. "Then say it for Nate." Kyle froze. Then slowly he stepped up. "No notes, no script, just Ruth." "I didn't expect to come back from Iraq," he began. "And when I did, I didn't expect to find a home again." He looked across the crowd. "I lost my brother in combat. He died pulling me out of a blast that should have killed both of us. I've lived every day since trying to honor him. Sometimes that meant silence. Sometimes that meant helping other vets. Sometimes that meant standing in the street saluting for 3 hours because I didn't know what else to do." He swallowed hard. "But last night I realized something. Nate didn't just save me to survive. He saved me to live, to keep building the kind of world he believed in. A world where towns like this don't get overrun by fear, where people don't have to wonder who's watching their back." Kyle looked directly at Ramirez, now in the back of a squad car parked on the edge of the square, eyes furious, defeated. "We drew a line," Kyle said, "and we held it." The silence that followed was full, not empty. It carried a weight that settled on every heart in that square. Then the crowd began to clap. Not wild, not frenzied, but respectful. It's the kind of applause that means we see you now. Kyle stepped away from the mic, and Maria wrapped an arm around his shoulders. Jake raised his can of soda like a salute. And just then, a group of children came running toward the stage, waving miniature American flags, not out of obligation, but because someone had handed them the truth, and they wanted to carry it forward. Later that night, after the crowds had thinned and the lights were packed up, Kyle sat alone at the edge of the war memorial, facing the bronze wall where names shimmered under the moonlight. He ran a hand over the engraving, Lance Corporal Nathaniel Booker. "I did it, brother," he whispered. "You can rest easy now." A warm breeze stirred, and for just a moment Kyle swore he could feel a hand on his shoulder, steady, silent, familiar. Then it was gone. But not really, because some things never leave, especially the ones that matter.